In an unprecedented judgment from the highest court in the land, the Prime Minister has been found to have acted unlawfully when he asked the Queen to suspend Parliament. Pause to unpack that. Prorogation never happened. Parliament has returned. The rule of law has been restored. This is constitutional and political dynamite. Whatever happens next, vote of no confidence, general election, second vote, caretaker PM, is anyone's guess. And the only certainty is yet more turmoil and confusion. But the one thing we can say for sure is this: the Supreme Court has unanimously ruled that Parliament is sovereign over the Crown and the government. Whatever your persuasion, left or right, leave or remain, this week has been a good one for our parliamentary democracy.
I find it really interesting when I saw the verdict of the Supreme Court and I saw who was celebrating and how they were celebrating and how frequently the word, yes, democracy, this is democracy being respected, was being used in those environments, because I find it directly contradictory to what I would believe democracy should have been applied to, which is back in 2016, which is the referendum vote. And I find it hypocritical when people are celebrating the verdict, which, by the way, you mentioned that it was unanimous. I find that suspicious at best, that you can have such a complicated, unprecedented situation and unanimously, all of them, 11-0.
So it was a
I
stitch
find
up.
that slightly... Well, I think it's slightly suspicious, and I would question whether or not even...
About it?
Well, this is a deeply complex situation where you've had contradictory outcomes from different courts. I'll tell him what I think is suspicious.
And remind him of the English court. 3 judges found for the prorogation.
Yeah,
so suddenly you've got 3 who are completely wrong, Michelle.
Yeah, you've had multiple courts ruling in different ways. You've had different rulings, you've had contradictory rulings. So this is very clearly a complex issue, but yet apparently it's so clear that all 11 judges rule the same way.
And all the 3 English ones were wrong. I
mean, I find it suspicious.
But remember, the defence that was put up by the government was pathetic. They didn't put any information to that court at all.
But it was enough to persuade the English court.
Yeah, but the English court...
No, I'm not impugning that. I'm not a judge. Their decision I respect.
Knew it was going to go to the Supreme Court. They all knew it would end up at the Supreme Court. But the truth is, the government's defence of their position was pathetic. Now, the question I ask is why? Why did they not make a decent case for themselves?
Question to you two, because you think that the 11 Supreme Court justices were wrong.
No.
No way. I mean, would you be happy if the judgment had gone the other way and the Tories lost a general election and Corbyn then prorogued Parliament for let's say, a year while he maybe closed down private schools?
Before I yield to Nick very quickly, I didn't say it was wrong. I said it was suspicious that all 11 seem to have this monumental moment of clarity about something which previously had been very complex. I thought you did say it was wrong. You said it was wrong. So, OK.
Well, I said it was wrong in Greg's bit.
Source for the Tory goose, source for the Labour gander.
No, of course I wouldn't want to see private schools closed down.
No, I'm not talking about that. My point is,
yes, I do.
the general principle is, who is sovereign? What is the highest authority in the land?
Obviously the Supreme Court, currently. But what needs to come out of this, as and when, if and when, is we probably need a written constitution. Yeah. That is what I think we are moving towards. All I would say is, to pick up on Greg's point in our previous conversation, just look at this from outside the loathsome Westminster bubble, and you're watching this in Hull, or you're watching this in Sunderland, or you're watching this in Leicester, and 11 judges for whom none of us vote, I doubt even we could name all their names, they sit and they decide to tell an unopposed speaker to bring back MPs, around 66% of whom are seen not to carry out the biggest mandate the country's ever seen.
Sorry.
And you don't... No, let me finish, please. And you don't see that as the... I'm not saying they're right, but this is the establishment.
No, sure, I can see that. I can see that.
I think you guys need to be really careful here.
Why?
I mean, I didn't expect this to come into discussion. I mean, let me finish. As I was saying a moment, I'm uneasy about the judgment, but actually, for us to sit here and say, actually, we know we're a bit smarter than these 11 people.
Said that.
All my lecturers, for example, I'm a chemist, all my lecturers agree that Newton's laws of motion are basically right. Does that, because somebody, does that make it a conspiracy? Or is
I did
it
not say
they,
that I was
they were asked to
smarter,
interpret
just so you
the
know.
law. They were asked to interpret the Constitution, and it might be that actually, for people who actually know about the Constitution, the answer is straightforward. So let's not get into is there a conspiracy here?
For the English
Can I bring
judges,
Greg in? We're talking about authority.
That's why they're the...
Can we just remind everybody that what actually happened was that the leader of an executive government, on a mandate of 90,000 Tory members, on that authority, decided to suspend a parliament of 560 elected MPs during the most difficult and constitutionally complicated period of this country's modern history. Greg?
Well, I thought, when you looked at what happened, I just thought, your point, if this had gone the other way, what we basically
Sorry,
said,
explain what you mean.
Well, if the judges had found
it was awful,
it was lawful, then that means any Prime Minister can promote Parliament any time they want.
That's
and
what I
that
was saying.
That has always been the case, Greg.
No.
It has always been the case.
No,
but there's been convention has applied, whereby they've only done so for 4 or 5 days.
We have a constitution based on tradition and convention. Now, you're probably right, Nick, it's the time to start writing it down and say we can't do that anymore because it perhaps gives too much interpretation to the judges. But all they said was, the reasons you have given for this promulgation are not valid.
We need to hear.
We're not saying neither Michelle and I are implying bias or any inappropriate or improper behaviour. It's just puzzling when you look at the numbers.
What does the word suspicious mean?
It means it's
the scores on the doors.
It makes no sense.
The scores on the doors. 3-0.
I find it bizarre that you would reference my intellect or perceived intellect in this conversation.
Sorry, when I did
that? You interpreted what I was saying as that somehow I believe I'm more intellectual than this High Court judge. I find that really bizarre because that would make me stupid to suggest
Look, this will be
that.
absolutely clear. What I am saying is, I just don't think the 5 of us are qualified to second-guess 11 Supreme Court judges. Can I just make my point, actually, which is that, actually, I am sympathetic to the point of view that I'm worried about this judgment because, personally, I'm not sure that I want lawyers deciding on what I think is essentially a political matter. I'm not going to argue about whether they've interpreted the Constitution rightly or wrong. I'm just going to say I think that what in technical terms you'd call the competence of the court is now being expanded into a place where I don't think anybody thought it would be when it was set up.
The reason the judges have had to stick their oar in is because parliamentary sovereignty has been eroded since the referendum result. And we've had to hear from one woman, Gina Miller, who has had to establish the principle that Parliament is sovereign, not once, but twice since the referendum result. First, that Parliament had to have a say on the deal. Secondly, that Parliament could not be prorogued. So let's hear from Gina Miller.
It doesn't really matter who is Prime Minister. The office of Prime Minister cannot decide to abuse their power and close down Parliament, our elected representatives, if that Parliament is disagreeing with them. If we had lost our case, if I'd lost the case, then the precedent would have stood that a Prime Minister could just close down Parliament for 5 weeks. And that is not right. Our parliamentarians are there to represent us. It really is important to understand that this case is much, much bigger than Brexit. It is about a Prime Minister abusing his power and actually giving the Queen illegal advice.
Gina Miller, not an anti-Brexit activist, not a pro-Remain campaigner, simply standing up for the rule of law and due process.
Or giving judges powers that they shouldn't have, possibly.